This video lecture will provide an introduction to telehealth in occupational therapy. We'll be highlighting key terminology, technologies, clinical applications, and evidence, as well as key resources to be aware of. My personal journey began over a decade ago. I was providing early intervention therapy services to children and working with parents, and I realized that there was such a profound shortage of providers and that many children weren't getting served at the frequency that they needed. I was also at that time receiving calls from other therapists to get suggestions and strategies, and I was finding that I was able to provide helpful input just through telephone conversations, and how much more impact I might have if I could actually see the children, such as through video conferencing. And then also my daughter was receiving early intervention, and we were having access challenges due to provider shortages. And so all of this together helped me to start down the path of exploring the use of telehealth in occupational therapy. There's a few things to be aware of when it comes to terminology. The World Federation of Occupational Therapy, as you can see on the screen, has defined telehealth as the use of information and communication technologies, or ICT, to deliver health-related services when the provider and the client are in different physical locations. So when we talk about telehealth, we're really talking about a remote service delivery model. We're using the technology to provide the service to a client who is in a physically different location. Similarly, AOTA has provided a telehealth position paper, and the definition from the most current paper, published in 2018, defines telehealth as the application of evaluative, consultative, preventative, and therapeutic services delivered through information and communication technologies. This paper highlights lots of considerations, including models of care, technology, practice considerations and ethical considerations, funding and reimbursement, as well as providing some clinical examples. It's also important to note that AOTA has an ethics advisory opinion, which was published in 2017. So I encourage you to explore both of those resources available through AOTA. As we talk about terminology, it's important to recognize that the same service delivery model is called many different things. So telemedicine, telehealth, telerehabilitation, teleoccupational therapy, telepractice, telecare. The main thing to recognize is that AOTA endorses the term telehealth, that it really provides the right term to describe our full scope of occupational therapy practice, that's a term that's applicable in both the medical model, educational model, and community settings. And so going forward, we as professionals, occupational therapists, should use that AOTA endorsed term. So when publishing literature, rather than referring to it as e-health or internet-based services, really using the terminology of telehealth. That will make it easier going forward as we're doing literature reviews and searching for evidence to find terms or find the evidence as it relates to telehealth. But recognizing that there's many different terms that have been used up to this point, and that different professions endorse different terms. So AOTA has endorsed telehealth. Similarly, the American Physical Therapy Association has endorsed the term telehealth. And the American Speech Language Hearing Association, ASHA, has endorsed the term telepractice. So even though we're using different terms, we're all talking about the same thing, which is the remote service delivery model. You might also hear terms describing the actual service being provided, so teleintervention, telemonitoring, teleevaluation, telepractice again. So just recognizing that in our common terminology of discussing, having conversations, and so forth, you may hear different terms, but ideally in moving forward in publications, we all are using and speaking the same language of telehealth, and that is, again, the recognized term by AOTA. Another common concept to think about and to kind of share with others as you're talking about telehealth is that it's not an all or nothing approach. So we can do telehealth, use telehealth as part of a delivery model where only telehealth is being used, as part of a hybrid model where some services are being provided in person and some services are being provided through telehealth. So if there are instances where you as a practitioner feel like you need to have your hands on your client, there's safety considerations or other things that come into play, then it may be more appropriate to do a hybrid model. But if other aspects of your services that you feel like all services are provided can be effective through telehealth, then that may be that you use purely a telehealth model. So just recognizing that there are variances, and clinical reasoning really should dictate whether an in-person delivery model is used, whether it's hybrid, or whether telehealth is most appropriate. Moving on now, we'll talk about technologies that are commonly used with telehealth. There's two key terms to be aware of, and that's synchronous or asynchronous. Synchronous is going to be anything that's happening live or in real time. It might be video conferencing or gaming or virtual reality technologies that allow real-time engagement. And asynchronous just simply means that it's happening in a recorded fashion, store and forward. So it's being stored on a device and forwarded to the practitioner. It's a good way to think of it. And this is going to be things like photographs, video, electronic communications, other means to engage with your client that's not in real time. And both models are appropriate for occupational therapy. There are caveats as far as reimbursement generally requires live interaction, but recognizing that a lot of our evaluations are now set up in electronic platforms. Some of the main providers of our assessments provide secure online portals where clients can go in and complete questionnaires and so forth, and those can be scored. So recognizing that there is certainly a place for asynchronous telehealth, and that can be incorporated into our delivery models. Another consideration is, how is the client going to access the technology? Do they already have it available to them in their home that they have and are using, such as a desktop, laptop, a tablet? Or will a provider, perhaps another discipline, bring it in for you to remotely connect with a patient or client and provide expertise that might not otherwise be available? Or will you leverage existing technology in the community? There is, many states have telehealth networks and have libraries or health departments equipped with video conferencing technology. So sometimes that's an option if the client does not have access in their home, or the internet service is not available within the home sufficient to engage in video conferencing. You could potentially have a client then only need to go a short distance from their home to access a telehealth network or technology that would enable delivery through telehealth. Sometimes too, loaning equipment is an option. So there's lots of different considerations around technology and different options to enable a client to have access to the technology. Another consideration is the video conferencing platform, and there's many to choose from, and the key is to explore personally how that platform will enable the delivery of telehealth and to do it in a secure manner that is compliant with requirements of federal regulation that we'll touch on here momentarily. So these are just a few that are listed. They're not intended to be an inclusive list or in any way endorse any one particular video conferencing platform. Recognizing that some of these services provide a free version and then an upgraded subscription-based service that is compliant and provides a business associate agreement that would be an element associated with the HIPAA federal regulations. So just being aware that you need to do some research and explore. Most of them have very similar features. Some of them more are user-friendly, or perhaps are more compatible with certain browsers and devices. So as a clinician, doing some exploration of these different options or exploring new options that are coming on the market. Other practice considerations include recognizing that telehealth is a delivery tool. So the service being provided is occupational therapy, and that's within our scope of practice in each state. So you are providing occupational therapy, you simply are using telehealth as the tool in which it's being delivered. I like to almost equate it to hippotherapy. If you think about using the horse as the tool to deliver occupational therapy, similarly, we're using technology as a tool to deliver occupational therapy. The location of service is currently deemed where the client is located, and that's a really important consideration for licensure. So if you're providing services across state lines, you need to be licensed in the state where the client is located, unless you are working in the federal system, sometimes with military bases and so forth. The VA system, there is an exception, as well as in some states there is short-term practice exceptions. For example, in Kentucky, You can practice on a license from another state for up to 30 days. So just doing some research on that and being sure to be in compliance with licensure requirements. Also, as I briefly highlighted, you need to be aware of HIPAA, which has to do with privacy and security of health information. HITECH, which is an act specifically related to electronic transmission, and it's the Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health Act. So that comes into play as we talk about using it, using telehealth. And then FERPA if it's within an educational model. So all of these different legislation, federal legislation, requires us to be cognizant of the requirements and to uphold those when providing services through telehealth. Liability insurance, primarily just to be aware of any implications as to coverage when it relates to telehealth. In general, in reaching out to different liability insurance companies, they will state that as long as you're working within your scope of practice, you're covered. So there's no differentiation between whether services are being provided in person or through telehealth. And then lastly, just being competent in all aspects of delivery when providing services through telehealth. So having competency not only in skills and knowledge related to that practice area, but also the use of technology and helping your client in their use of technology. As mentioned previously with the AOTA telehealth position paper, telehealth is appropriate within all OT practice areas. And can be used for evaluation, consultation, intervention, monitoring, and supervision of students and occupational therapy assistants. Just being sure to explore other things that come into play with that, such as reimbursement and any kind of requirements from the reimbursement entity as it relates to supervision or practice, as well as practice acts and requirements as it relates to supervision of occupational therapy assistants and students. So recognizing that telehealth is appropriate and can be used, but there are different parameters, and those are sometimes state specific in identifying what those are. There is evidence that supports the use of telehealth in occupational therapy in all practice areas. In general, there is very high satisfaction among clients and therapists. Also, there's good evidence in the studies that have been done that demonstrate comparable outcomes or sometimes even superior outcomes with the use of telehealth. So I encourage you to delve into the literature, more specifically in the areas of interest that you have for practice, and no doubt you're going to find some good evidence that is supporting the use of telehealth in occupational therapy, but in healthcare in general. So some of the key resources that may help you on your journey is to visit AOTA's website. There's specifically a page dedicated to telehealth with hyperlinks to various resources. There's also the American Telemedicine Association, and they have a telerehabilitation special interest group that has resources specific to interest of occupational therapists. You'll see noted also the California Telehealth Resource Center has a wonderful comprehensive kit to help walk you through the stages of developing and implementing and evaluating a telehealth program. There's also the Center for Connected Health Policy, which is advancing policy at the state and federal levels and can be a valuable resource, as well as the National Telehealth Resource Centers. And there's many different links to the various centers that are designated for various regions, and these have wonderful resources on their website. I also wanted to mention the International Journal of Telerehabilitation. It is a journal that is open access, peer-reviewed, and PubMed indexed. And this journal has many articles that will be of interest to occupational therapists. So I encourage you to explore past and current issues of this journal to see articles specific to occupational therapy. And you can see a few there highlighted on the screen that may be of interest. So in conclusion, telehealth is a disruptive force that's changing the healthcare landscape, including occupational therapy. It's going to be a mainstream delivery model within healthcare because it works and because it helps our clients and it improves access and it is effective. So we as clinicians and as students and want to be advocates, we want to engage in the use of telehealth in an ethical way that supports best practice. There is research that supports its use as a viable service delivery model in OT, and there's opportunities that exist to incorporate it again in all OT practice areas. So hopefully this gives you a quick overview of telehealth in occupational therapy.